Elder Lackey, thank you for joining me in this interview about the history of Old School Baptists. I'm grateful that you had the time to do it because I know that you're practically a walking encyclopedia on the subject, and so we want to tap your brain for some information on this subject. And so I'll just open it up and ask you a question, sort of an open-ended question, and you can take it from there, especially regarding, we know about the Black Rock Address and the split that occurred between the Old and New School Baptists in 1832. Most people are aware of that. Fewer people are aware of what happened after that. From what I understand, it gets to the point where there's further splits that happened, and even from the 19th century into the beginning of the 20th century. And it gets to the point where just because someone says they're primitive Baptists doesn't mean that they believe the same things as the Elder Beebe and Samuel Trott and other foundational Old School Baptists did. Am I exaggerating, or would that be an accurate statement?
No, I think the statement is very accurate. First, let me thank you for thinking enough of me to have me on here. And I don't know about a walking encyclopedia, but I have studied the subject I guess, probably as much or more than anybody. So any information I have, I've received, so freely I can give. And yes, there were numerous splits. In fact, if you really want to nitpick and hair split and things like that, you can go back to the time of 1832 and find people calling themselves Old School Baptists who didn't believe what Beebe did.
Mm-hmm.
But they were few and far between, and you did not find them, for the most part, openly avowing it.
Can you think of any names of people at that time?
James Osborne of Baltimore.
He was an elder?
Yes. He he was also a doctor of veterinary medicine. He was from England. And though he claimed to be an Old School Baptist, he is not numbered amongst the signers of the Black Rock Address. And neither will you find him in fellowship with the Baltimore Association, of which Black Rock and the Ebenezer Church in Baltimore, which was later served by Samuel Trott, was members. And you will not find him associating with many who we would call today, or we would recognize as being Old School Baptists.
Now, if I can interject, just a question. I think I remember reading an article by Gilbert Beebe, mentioning that someone was criticizing them for having I think it was James Osborne's association, his name not appearing on the Black Rock Address signers. And if I'm not mistaken, Beebe was defending that and saying that he asked for, he said he was in agreement with it. I don't know the whole controversy. Do you remember that? But there was I thought it was him that Beebe was responding to a criticism about.
It may be, but right off the top of my head, I don't remember it. I'll have to look that information up.
Okay. It's in the signs.
I know that Osborne went back to England and tried to go among the Gospel Standard Baptists over there. But when he said that the doubts and fears of the Christian were nothing but bugbears and boogeymen that adults should not fear or have anything to do with, Philpott and the rest of them cut him off pretty quickly.
What year was this about? Can you remember?
1840s, late 1840s, maybe early 50s. There are several articles in the Gospel Standard that Philpott wrote about Osborne after he went back.
I see. Now, can I ask a question? What would be, since you brought up the Gospel Standard Baptists in England, what would be the differences between them, if any, and Old School Baptists? in America?
The main difference is, some of the main differences are in practice rather than in doctrine. For example, the Gospel Standard Baptist never had any kind of problem with musical instruments in worship. Some of their churches sing a cappella, some of them have an organ, some of them, and it's never affected their fellowship.
I see.
They tend to be much more experiential or experimental in their preaching than doctrinal. And sometimes that can make you wonder what they really believe.
Can you give us an example of that? I mean, can you think of something?
Yeah, I can. Unfortunately, I can't remember the name of the minister, but as far as I was concerned, after hearing him, he did nothing but preach a duty faith sermon.
I see.
And he was certainly held in fellowship by the ones that were at this. This was at a special meeting at what's called Keach's Meeting House in, I can't remember the name of the little town. It was where Keach was when he was still with the General Baptist in England.
You're talking about Benjamin, not Elias, correct?
Oh, yes, Benjamin, absolutely, Benjamin Keach. And once a year, they have the Gospel Standard Baptist hold a meeting there.
Uh-huh.
And he was one of the speakers at this meeting, and it was certainly not what I expected after hearing some very good preaching in Brighton from the pastor that was there then. This would have been in the mid-'80s. Sometime probably around, or late 80s, around 88, 89, 90, somewhere in there.
Uh-huh.
And in fact, I was able to speak to that pastor some, and I found with him there was virtually no difference between him and us doctrinally.
Okay.
At all. And I don't think with Mr. Ramsbottom, that is I guess still the editor of the Gospel Standard and pastors the church in Luton. I don't believe there's any difference in us, though my conversation was not as long with him as it was with the other pastor.
I see.
So, but yeah, that's.
Go ahead.
They're also. Again, this goes into doctrine as well as practice, but they consider Sunday to be the Christian Sabbath, and you shouldn't do anything on Sunday other than, go to meeting, and
I get you.
that's about it. But
I see. Now, in your opinion, among old school Baptists, and this is what's interesting, they would have had. Are we correct in saying that the Gospel Standard Baptists in the 19th century, around the time of Beebe, some of them would have used instruments in the church and so forth?
Oh, yes, I believe they would have.
And so, do we hear Beebe criticizing that, or at any point of view expressing an opinion on that subject?
No, not that I'm aware of. I don't believe he or anyone who was close to the Gospel Standard Baptist in the 19th century ever mentioned their use of instrumental music. Probably because they didn't make an issue about it.
I see.
If they would have made an issue of instrumental music, then yeah, I think that would have come to the fore. But since they didn't, then I don't think anybody else did either.
Now, let's follow along this line of thinking. I'm very curious. Do you know of any primitive or old school Baptist church of the 19th century that was in fellowship with the Signs of the Times, that paper, that might have used instruments in their service?
No.
So in America, it seemed pretty clear to say that none of them used it.
Yes, that was considered an innovation when what is going to become known today as the Progressive Primitive Baptists, when they started using instrumental music in worship. That was considered new things. And even the soft side of the Primitive Baptists were kind of hands off on a lot of that.
I see. Now, I guess what I'm saying, though, is, and I don't know if this would be accurate to say, that if, do we know that there was contact between Beebe and the Gospel Standard Baptists in England?
I believe the only contact there was an exchange of papers.
Explain that exchange of papers. What does that mean?
It means that the Signs sent a copy of their paper each month to a representative of the Gospel Standard in England, and the Gospel Standard sent a representative of the Signs of the Times a copy of the paper at no charge.
I see. Okay. So I guess, now here's where it gets tricky, huh? So the Gospel Standard Baptists use musical instruments, and the Old School Baptists in America did not choose to, but yet they continued in fellowship and viewed themselves as believing the same things. Would it be correct to say that the use of musical instruments in a meeting is not necessarily a point of fellowship among Old School Baptists, or what would be the opinion on that?
Well, I would think that there probably would be quite the controversy if anyone tried to bring them in over here, where historically they have not been used. Over there, where there was no controversy amongst themselves. Now we're talking about fellowship. Let me say this about fellowship between us and the Gospel Standard Baptists. My understanding of them is, and if that's changed, it's been in the last few years, and I'm unaware of it, so if anyone wants to correct me on this, I guess I can stand corrected. But it used to be in their fellowship, you had to sign their articles of faith.
I see. And those articles of faith, did they mention instruments? That wasn't an issue for them, so it would have been included.
No, it does not mention it all. However, unless their position is changed, you do have to sign the articles of faith and initial the articles that were added on the eternal sonship of Christ.
Which would have been in agreement with the Old School Baptists in that case, right?
Would it? That's the question. When you read Trot, the Word was eternal. And that Word did not become the Son till it was made flesh.
I see. Now, let me ask you.
I don't know.
Did Beebe state his opinion on that subject?
He seems to have been in agreement with Trot, as far as I can tell. There were only a couple of things that they seemingly disagreed on, and I've never fully understood one of them, which was their controversy on angels. And I don't remember honestly what the other one was.
Well, Elder Lackey, if you don't mind, at a future interview, we'd like to cover that issue, and maybe you can bone up a little bit on it as to the differences between, slight differences that could have existed between Gilbert Beebe and Samuel Trott on some issues. I know that there were some other issues, especially in regards to the last days and eschatology, as they call it. that Davy would have had unusual views, which would not have been considered norm among old school Baptists. Are we correct in saying that?
And Trot as well. In fact, I think trying to judge a group or a person solely by their eschatology, we probably would have a problem even today with a lot of us. But yeah, that's absolutely right, and that's part of the thing on this thing of angels. It's related to eschatology and that.
I see.
So I
now
think.
Let me, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to mention, to follow up on, if you look at the principles that the old school Baptists in 1832 set up, we're going back to the issue of musical instruments, just to top that off. They didn't mention musical instruments one way or the other, correct?
Correct. They did not mention musical instruments one way or the other. I think they would have taken you to the New Testament and opened it up and said, now show me where there was a musical instrument. Yeah,
of course. This would have been, and this would have not been, this view would not have been limited to just them, old school Baptists. There were Presbyterians at the time and other groups of Reformed Christians who also believed that musical instruments were an innovation to be placed in there.
Even among the New School Baptists, and I'm sorry that my mind is so foggy right now, but I can't remember the name of the pastor of the Missionary Baptist Church in Richmond. But it was said that when he heard that a Baptist church in Rhode Island had put in an organ, he said he did not care what the fashionable Baptists of Rhode Island did in their services, but he would never serve a church that had an organ in it.
Fascinating.
And you still have today the independent missionary Baptist churches that historically were associated with the Baptist Examiner and others that were even more independent that don't use musical instruments to this day.
Fascinating. Okay, so then let's continue back. So we were talking then, we drifted a little bit. We were talking about 1832, and that you mentioned that Osborne and others. There was even then, of course, disagreement among the old school Baptists on certain issues of people who claimed to be old school Baptists who would not have been in agreement with the main issues, the main points expressed in the Black Rock Address.
Yes.
But continue on. So we're in 1932 about what starts to happen among the old school Baptists.
Things rock along, and everything is, we're having splits all over the country. Associations are dividing. All this has been working since 1825. And you had Daniel Parker with his public discourse. You had John Taylor with his address.
Now listen, if you don't mind, if you can jump in and fill in some of those, Daniel Parker and then John Taylor for our listeners.
Parker was a frontier preacher who, at the time of his discourse, I believe was living in Indiana.
Daniel
Parker on the frontier. He was the founder and chief exponent of what is now called the Two Seed in the Spirit Primitive Baptist, or the Two Seed in the Spirit Baptist, of which I believe there are just two churches left that claim it direct lineage back there. There may be three, but I think there's just two.
And where are they located?
One's in Texas, and one is in Indiana, and if the third one still has any members, it's in Tennessee.
Okay.
And at one time there was a lot of them, but that part's beside the point. But what he was an uneducated man, and he was considered by many to be uncouth, but they said when he was in the pulpit, he was one of the most eloquent speakers that's ever attempted to preach the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
And he saw the problems with the missionary societies and the missionary boards and all of this that was beginning to take place, and he wrote a public address. That's the way it's known today, is a public address, and it has to do with the unscripturalness of the modern mission movement. And John Taylor, was in Kentucky, and Taylor wrote his thoughts on missions as early as 1820. And what he, in his thoughts on missions, was inspired by missionaries coming trying to convert him to their cause. And he wrote that little booklet. So this was the culmination of something that had been happening. And finally, in the 1830s, you started seeing divisions in Baptist associations all over the United States based on this missionism and the mission movement and the begging for money and all of the things that went along with that system. So
now, John Taylor broke away. Was there a separation between John Taylor and the main group of Old School Baptists under the Signs and Beebe's leadership?
I'll have to look and see when Taylor died. I'm not sure he ever participated in any of the division. In fact, I think that he kind of tried to hold things together during his lifetime. Tried to keep his hand on both, maybe.
I see.
Because he didn't want to see the separation. I know he didn't. In his history of 10 Baptist churches, he calls Samuel Trott the Yankee schoolmaster.
I guess that was not a compliment.
That was definitely not a compliment. However, one of the leaders of the so-called anti-mission party in Kentucky was Theodoric Boulware. And
how do you spell that last name?
Boulware, Boulware.
Okay.
And Theodoric Boulware, he speaks very highly of. But Boulware was a young man when this was going on and just starting in the ministry. Whether he had made known his feelings about missionism at that time, we don't know.
Right.
So all of this has been fomenting in the West. Because remember, Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana, that's the West.
Right.
Missouri is the far West at that time. And it's rolling back east, and it culminates, so to speak, at least in my opinion, it culminates in the Black Rock Address.
I see.
Because it, for the first time, set forth in a systematic way the problems that the old school brethren had with what was going on in the modern system that was being, or at least being tried to be introduced amongst the Baptists. As Andrew Fuller was trying to lift them out of the dunghill in England a little while before that, these preachers had taken on his mantle and carried it to the United States, and missionism seems like it's a direct outgrowth of the doctrine that would deny the sovereign grace of God and the eternal personal election of believers.
Mm-hmm. Now, can you introduce our hearers a little bit, just in case they're not aware of who Andrew Fuller was?
Andrew Fuller was an English minister who preached that it was the duty of all men to repent and believe the gospel.
Uh-huh.
Absolute duty of everyone. I mean, doesn't matter whether the Spirit convicted you or not. You had a duty to do it, and that became known as duty faith. It came to the point where they said that Christ's death was sufficient for the whole world, but efficient only to the elect. They were trying to get away from the particular redemption, the fact that the Lord had a number of people set, fixed, and absolutely predestined to be His, who would repent and believe the gospel, to make it applicable to all so that they could offer the gospel to everyone.
I see.
That was the basics of Fullerism as was experienced in the United States, particularly.
Uh-huh.
And so we have all that, and then what happens is after 1832 and these divisions happen, and in different places it's at different times. I know for the life of me I can't remember the name of the association, but there was at least one down in Georgia that didn't split till the 1840s.
Uh-huh.
And so all of this has fallen out. And there seems to be relative, at least, peace amongst the churches, peace among the brethren, until the 1850s.
Okay. What happened in the 1850s?
In the 1850s, a minister in Virginia named John Clark began to publicly take issue with Gilbert Beebe and especially Samuel Trott on the doctrine of eternal vital union, or just eternal union, calling them Arians and saying that they must believe in a created Christ, saying that they believe in all sorts of heresies. And as this gathered steam, he was joined in his attacks by the son of Elder Wilson Thompson, Greg M. Thompson, and between the two of them, they fomented strife and division among the Baptists from basically Kentucky to Georgia.
What year would this have been? The 1850s, stretching to where?
1850s. I would say the whole thing had probably fallen out by 58, 59.
I see.
So we're talking, say, 1849 to 1858, 59, that 10-year period.
And were there associations that broke went with them?
Absolutely, there were associations. The Catoctin Association, of which Clark was the leading elder. The Ebenezer Association, both in Northern Virginia.
Uh-huh.
They divided with the majority of Baptists. Let's go on and finish this subject.
I figured you'd say that. Go ahead.
What you had was you had these divisions where associations were splitting, The Mates Creek Association in Kentucky split, and there were two of them. You had all these type divisions where they were, in my opinion, and this is looking with the benefit of hindsight of 150 years, they were looking to form their own chain of correspondence where they would be at the head. I cannot help but think that the main reason for Clark seemingly hating Trot so much was the fact that he was jealous of the esteem in which Trot was held after he left Wells Tract and came to Northern Virginia to pastor the churches in the some of the churches in the Virginia corresponding meeting. Trot went down there and served those churches. He continued to write for the Signs. He continued to be held in esteem, not only the Signs, but also William Beebe's paper down in Georgia.
What was the name of that paper?
The Gospel Messenger.
Okay, and that began when?
After he moved down there, I believe in the 1840s.
I see. And are there any issues of that paper available?
Yes. The Southern Baptists have microfilms of most of them.
I see.
Or a lot of them. I wouldn't say most. Just because I don't know.
Is it still in publication?
Oh, Lord, no. No. It went out. I'll tell you when it went out. It went out when the war between the states started.
I see. So 1860 was done.
Yep.
Okay.
When William joined the Army.
Yeah.
As founder and editor, it went with him.
I see.
Trot was being held in esteem by the brethren. Even, and I don't want to impugn the man too much because, gosh, I never met him.
Right.
But I have to wonder as well, if you remember in 1840, sometime around 1843, I can't remember the exact year, Beebe went to Alexandria, Virginia, and served that church in Alexandria.
Yes, there are some articles that are dated Alexandria, Virginia that he's written.
That's right. He was there, I think, 2 to 3 years.
Uh-huh.
And I have to wonder if maybe that was the start of it when if Clark thought, oh my goodness, they calling that Yankee down there from New York, and here I am, right here.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's not long after that you see the beginnings of his going after shall we say, the majority of the old school Baptists.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether there's ever been a majority among the old school Baptists.
Right.
As close as there ever has been was Ben. And so they were known in the East as the Clark Baptists.
I see.
And they were known that way, and they existed. Their churches existed sometimes side by side with the Beebe Baptists, sometimes not. They did not travel further north than Virginia at that time on the east. Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, Indiana, Illinois, maybe Missouri, because Greg Thompson went from Missouri to Georgia, so there could have been some in there. But yeah, that was the first split strictly among the old school Baptists.
And are there any of those churches still around?
Absolutely. Oh yeah.
What would they be called today? Still Clark Baptist, or would they have another name?
most people would call them conditionalists,
I see.
or they would call themselves old line.
Say it again.
Old line primitive Baptist.
I see.
Now, these Baptists, and I know I'm going to be jumping ahead a little bit here, but because they denied the eternal union and particular election of a people in Christ before the foundation of the world, they then came to deny the absolute predestination of all things. I have not read enough in Clark's writings to be able to verify this for myself, but I have been told, and by the way, Clark, after he split with the main body of Baptists, formed his own paper, Zion's Advocate.
Is that still in print? Still available?
Yes, but it's now called the Advocate Messenger.
I see. And it's based out of where? Virginia or?
Probably Virginia still.
Okay.
That's where the last issue I saw was published somewhere in Virginia.
I see.
But I have been told that if you read Clark's articles, he says some bad things about Beebe and Trott, declares they believed in a created Christ, declares this, that, the other. But you will never find anything in his writings against absolute predestination.
Uh-huh.
That he was still a predestinarian.
I see.
But those who followed him, it's kind of like if your car's front end is out of a line just a 20th of a centimeter.
Mm-hmm.
Going from here to the store, if you're driving a straight line, a couple of miles, you'd never notice it.
Right.
But once you go a couple of 100 miles, it's a little more off.
Yes.
And once you go 1,000 miles, it's way off.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way that it seems to be with doctrine, that people they start off down a path that doesn't seem to be there's that much difference, but the further they go as a people now, the further they get from the truth. And that's what happened to them. And they were ripe for conditional time salvation when that doctrine came along in the 1890s. That they were just ripe and ready for it. I mean, they had those people amongst them who denied predestination, who denied particular election, and so we can believe that God's children will never be manifested in this life, and as God's children.
We'll have to get to that conditional time salvation since that's a later development.
Oh yes, that's later, but that's where you will find those churches today.
I see.
You will find them among the conditionalists. In fact, when there started to be some splits in the Northeast, some of those churches, what would have been at that time the Clark Baptist, and are now the conditional Primitive Baptist, or
what year you're talking about that they started in Northeast?
20s, 30s.
Oh, in the 20th century.
Yeah, 20th century is where I'm talking about with that.
Can you think of any of some
Wilmington, Delaware Church, the Wilmington, Delaware Church.
I see. Okay.
When it divided with the Delaware Association, it allied itself, so to speak, with those that had been the Clark Baptist and were in the beginnings of the conditional movement at that time.
I see.
So, but when you go back and look at the Clark controversy, you have only a few sources of information about it. You have the Signs of the Times, of course, where a lot of it took place. You have the early years of Zion's Advocate that Clark put out. You have Clark's book, Exposure of Heresies of Some Who Call Themselves Old School Baptists. That was written in the 1860s, if I remember right. And if you really want to get back to some of the source, you have Greg M. Thompson's book, The Measuring Rod, which is either 1858 or 1859.
And are those books still in print?
Oh, Lord, no.
I see.
You have to look for them. You have to look for them. If you have access to the Primitive Baptist Library in Elon College, there's copies of both of them in there. In fact, that's the only copy of the Measuring Rod I ever saw, was the one in there.
I see.
I have seen other copies of Clark's book, but that's the only copy of Thompson's I ever saw.
And tell us a little bit about Elder Thompson. His full name was what?
Greg, Grigm Thompson. Now, one of his books is still in print, The Primitive Preacher, but I must confess I have never read it. He was the son of Elder Wilson Thompson. If you believe the stories that were told on him, he left his wife and abandoned his wife and children in the West and went to Georgia and took up with another woman and was serving churches in Georgia at the time of this division.
I see.
If you look at trying to think of whose writings it's in, whether it's I believe it's in the writings of J.F. Johnson. He talks about a letter that Greg Thompson published in one of the papers. It may have been in Zion's Advocate, and where he proceeds to say that Elder Wilson Thompson endorsed his view and went against Beebe and Trott and Johnson as well, and he was sternly taken to task for it. I said that William Beebe's paper was called The Gospel Messenger. It was the Southern Baptist Messenger.
I see.
Not the Gospel Messenger.
The name of that book you're looking at is what's the name of the book? J.F.
Johnson's writings.
Just the title is just J.F. Johnson's writings?
Yeah, the reprint, that's what's on the spine. A compilation of J.F. Johnson's writings copied from the Signs of the Times, embracing a period of 30 years.
And who published that?
The last person that published it was Mark Jacobson.
Yes. Yes, I'm aware of him. I see. And that book is still available?
I have no idea what is available from Brother Mark anymore. I really don't know what he might have left. I know he didn't print many of them.
We will continue with the history of the old school or primitive Baptists in America, Part 2, further interviewing Elder Robert Lackey. Thank you for listening.